I'm super excited to be here and to talk about this fantastic subject of how do you manage in an environment where no one wants to work in? And I know that for those of us in senior care, it seems like we're banging our head against the wall, but truth be told, we've been dealing with this in every industry across America. It seems very challenging to get people to come into work. And so this seems like a great subject, and I'm so happy to be here. A couple of things. I have written 4 books. I have 3 of them with me. This one's my newest one called The Good Manager. This one's called Congratulations, Now Get Over Yourself. And this is one's called Managing When No One Wants to Work, which is going to be what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to give away all 3 of these books to 3 people who are the most engaged. So what does it mean to be the most engaged? A, have your camera on, please. B, if you could answer questions in the chat box, or you can just speak up if you have a question. Don't be afraid to pause me at any time. I can see the chat box, so feel free to use the chat and I will be sure to answer any questions you have. We only have 60 minutes, so I'm going to talk pretty fast, which means you have to listen pretty fast. So that's just going to be the way that it goes. So first and foremost, let me introduce you. I do have a ton of little friends with me today. And this is Timmy. It's a little dog. Are there any dog owners here? Anybody here have dogs? Oh, good, good, good. I have a dog too. His name's Topsy. Here's something interesting that those of you who don't have a dog, maybe you don't know. And those of you who even have a dog, you might not know. But dogs have no ability to feel bad. None. They have no ability. They have no ability to sense that when they come in the house from a rainy day and they shed all over the place and get your nice white carpet all dirty, they don't have the ability to feel bad. If they jump up on you and you just got dressed and they spill your coffee all over you, they don't have the ability to feel bad. It reminds me of employees. I can't tell you how many employees. I came out of the Marine Corps when I started to work in senior care, and I had never heard of the turn of phrase, a no call, no show. I never heard of that, I never heard of the idea that somebody doesn't call in, let the boss know they can't come in, and they don't show up, and then they show up the next day. I remember the first time I had somebody show up after they no call, no show the day before, and I was just so puzzled. I was like, who does that? And they had no ability to feel that. I'm like, oy vey, it's so challenging. But then, I don't know about in South Dakota, but here in New York, we are inundated with squirrels right now. They are busy, busy, busy. They're just running around trying to find nuts for the winter. And they're busy burying them so that they can eat all winter. But here's something that's very interesting. 80% of the nuts that squirrels bury, they can't find. That's right. 80% of the nuts they bury for the winter, they never find. And this, in staffing terms, is what we call calling in. That's when staff show up and they still don't do anything. Anybody have staff like that? They show up, they don't do anything. That's what squirrels do. They do all this work and they have nothing to show for it. Of course, in management terms, there's this turn of phrase called a captive employee. And I don't know if you know what a captive employee is, but a captive employee is somebody who is not particularly motivated to do their job. They're not particularly motivated to propel the organization forward or to make sweeping changes or to even provide good service. They're really just there to get a paycheck. And here's the challenge with captive employees. They're not quitting. They're not going anywhere. And in fact, the common parlance, the common vernacular you hear from a captive employee, which, by the way, most of us managers wouldn't hear because they talk to it. They say this in closed doors and very hushed tones. They talk about outlasting the next manager, outlasting the DON, outlasting the administrator. Because if you're in any situation where, and it's very common where the staff could have 20, 30 years in a nursing home or a senior care center. They've been working there for 30 years. They help move the furniture in. But in that same time, there's been a dozen administrators, a dozen DONs. Well, what a captive employee gets used to is this constant turnover at the leadership level. And so they just like, well, just if they don't like what an administrator is saying or the rules that a DON is coming up with or another department head, it's like, we'll just wait. They'll leave soon enough. They just outlast all managers. Those are captive employees, and they can be quite a challenge for us to manage. And then, of course, we have, and I told you, I have a bunch of little animals with me. We have the whale. Oh, the whales. I don't know. Does anybody here know exactly how a whale dies? I know it's a terrible question on a nice, beautiful Wednesday, but does anybody know how a whale actually dies? No. A whale has to surface to breathe air. Lori, I see you, by the way. I appreciate you chatting in. Whales need to surface to breathe air. And so they always have to surface. And that's right, Donna, that's exactly right. They drown. A whale eventually gets too big, too overwhelming, and they get too tired to always surface. And so at some point, they will no longer be able to hold their head above water, and they will sink to the bottom and drown. I don't know if you all know this, but the turnover rate at the leadership level across all organizations is super high. It is extremely high. And administrators, I can't speak for South Dakota, but administrators here in New York, they have an 18-month shelf life. Every 18 months, we're losing administrators. They're being turned over. DONs is less than 12 months. Less than 12 months, we're having a turnover at the DON level. And it's this constant churning of all of these senior leaders in healthcare that is really problematic. And one of the reasons why managers are getting turned over so much is there's something called the burden of leadership. Has anybody ever heard of the burden of leadership? Let me show you what I mean. I have my iPad here. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to show you what I'm talking about with the burden of leadership. Nope, stay there. Here we go. There's a great website. There's this great website called You Had One Job. Has anybody ever heard of that website? You only had one job? It's a super fun website, and it speaks to the notion of the burden of leadership. Let's start here. As you can imagine, if you only had one job and it was to lay out this children's book and it's 5 bananas, but there's how many bananas on the screen? Here's the challenge with this. Whose fault is it that there are 6 bananas on a children's book page that says they're counting to 5? And before you come up with whose fault it is, let's go here. I mean, what are long yellow thingies? What are we talking about here? Or, you shouldn't smoke, especially if you are swimming, apparently. You shouldn't smoke. I don't know. Again, if you're the consumer, if you went to McDonald's and you asked for a fish fillet sandwich with cheese, you got in your car and this is what you open, I'm going to ask you, who are you mad at? Like when you think back, when you open this and you're like, what is this? What do you think? Do you think, oh, the employees at McDonald's are terrible? Probably not. I don't know a lot of people that blame the employee. A lot of customers don't blame the employees. Instead, what they do is they rightfully blame the manager. You see, the manager is on the hook. That's the burden of leadership. The manager is on the hook to the customer. So whatever service they're getting from us or product they're getting from us, the management team, if it's not good, it's our fault. If it is good, we take credit, but it's the burden of leadership is we are responsible for the outcomes of our teams. And that can be really challenging. This picture is really funny, actually, but this one, it gets less funny when you start looking at these road pictures. I'll go by that one quickly. So you can see that the manager is always on the hook for the outcomes of what their employees do. And it's not so bad when you have 1 or 2 employees, but for some of us, when we have 80, 90, 100 nurses, a dozen dietary workers, a dozen housekeeping workers, we have, all of these people working for us, it becomes very challenging for us to be on the hook for whatever outcome they have, especially when the outcomes are the opposite of what they are supposed to do. Obviously, this is supposed to be a right turn and it's a left turn. You know how long it has? You have to drive over this in order to be able to repaint it. But it's not just, as funny as this is, the burden of leadership for us in senior care, well, it looks like this. This is the burden of leadership. Because what's funny about this is I was just speaking to the Bureau of Prisons in New Hampshire, and I have this great little bit where I'm like, oh, and by the way, all the nurses are in this building are ambulatory, but the police didn't get the joke. So maybe you'll get the joke. All the nurses here are ambulatory. That means they are able to pick up this stuff, but then they don't. So the question is, as we look through pictures like this in long-term care and senior care centers, and you're just walking around, this is great. This is a front lobby. This is a chair in the front lobby. Can you imagine if you're coming in for an interview, or if you're coming in to do a tour, you're a family member coming in the tour to see if this is the right place for mom or dad, and there you go, like, just sit, take a seat in the lobby right there. We'll be right with you. And you look at the seat and you're like, what kind of management is this here? Like, who does this, right? Like, this is fun. I have it a little circled here only because this is if there's any maintenance people here in the room, that's a leaky toilet. And that's how you fix a leaky toilet. Just throw some toilet paper on top of it. It's always nice. We have a glove issue in a lot of these buildings that we're seeing. They end up in the weirdest places that you could imagine. Anybody ever see stuff like this? They walk around, and the question is again, whose fault is this? Who's in charge here? This is the burden of leadership. This is what the burden of leadership looks like in senior care. This picture was obviously taken in the winter because this fan is a sweater. It's not good when the fan has its own sweater. This picture is actually one of my favorites, only because the answer is yes, there is a air conditioner in that box. It's furniture now. It never made it to the window, but that's funny. Shower rooms. This has both soap, which is the pink, and BM, which is the not pink. How do you get BM and soap on the same shower head? I don't know. Then we have diapers and gloves. We have a little sign management that's super great. Don't put anything in the tub. And then, of course, that's the tub in the shower room. Is this resonating with anybody? Anybody ever see stuff like this? You get extra points if you know what this is. Anybody? Anybody tell me what this is? Come on. Just write it in the chat. A tub, bedding, sure. A shower, right? Yeah, this is this is called a CNA bed. This is a staff member created. That's right. Laura got it. This is an overnight. This is what you do overnight. This is where you sleep. We should charge for a hotel room here. This is nice. This is actually on the side of a med cart, and we found this doing what we call a wheelchair tour. I don't know if anybody's ever gone through a wheelchair tour, but we do it quite regularly. A wheelchair tour is where we put one of our managers in a wheelchair, we bring them out the front entrance of the building, we turn them around, and we just walk through every part of the building, down every hallway and everything. And we're really looking for a couple of things. One, we're looking for safety. We're making sure that because we're at a resident's eye view. When you put yourself in a wheelchair and you get pushed around, you're at a resident's eye view. So you're looking for safety, things that are sharp, but you're also looking for, like, can you read the activities calendar? Can you read the lunch menu? Is it big enough? Is the font big enough? Is the sign low enough to where if you're in a wheelchair, you can read it? That kind of thing. And we're also looking for things like this. This is unseen, a mess that is unseen from the nurse. From the nurse's point of view, standing at this cart, she can't see this. And it's quite accidentally that it's happening. All it is that every time she has medicine in a little cup, she just throws it in the garbage can, not realizing that it's taking the side. But as a resident, going up onto the unit, they're at this level, they're seeing this. What do they think? I know it looks gross. What are they thinking about this? They're saying, oh my gosh, management here is pretty terrible. This is the epitome of the burden of leadership, because this is a bedside table. I mean, a bedside table. This is a cubicle curtain that is clearly being used by the resident for anything other than privacy. But when a family member sees this, they don't blame the resident. They don't blame the staff. They say, the manager here, the management team here is pretty terrible. And by the way, you should know that this isn't even a housekeeping issue. People don't look at this and say, oh, housekeeping must be terrible here. Do you see this as dirty, attend, or brief? This is not a housekeeping issue. They don't even, residents and family members and outsiders, they don't even see this as a nursing issue. This is all a management issue. This is the burden of leadership. When you're walking around a home, I mean, who puts a dirty diaper in the sink of a resident room? Quite honestly. I remember when I took this picture and I brought it to the unit manager, and I was kind of like, just so you know, we're now seeing dirty diapers in the sink. Like, we're seeing them everywhere, but this kind of takes the cake. I remember one of the CNAs goes, some of our residents do self-care. And I'm like, okay, I guess that means you think a resident has the dexterity to roll up there. I've seen residents get out of their own briefs. It's not pretty, like they're kicking themselves out of it. This is somebody with a child at home. I think this is a pretty good case that this is somebody who's got some skill at holding up dirty diapers. Oh, this one's my favorite, because I took this picture and it's actually in a shower room. So there's a overbed table in a shower room. I saw this, I took the picture. A couple hours later, I was talking to the administrator about it, and I was like, oh my God, I got to show you this picture. So I show him, and he's like, you got to be kidding me. You got to take me where that is. So we go up on the second floor to see it, and the brief was still there, but the candy bar was gone. I don't care who you are. That's funny. I don't know. That's a whole new thing. Oh, this is just it just gets worse and worse until I was hired by this group. They had two nursing homes, and the nursing homes are right beside each other. And in fact, they share a parking lot. And they hired me to come in and work with the leadership team. They said that they were having, one building was really, really great, providing really great care, where the other one was really stumbling, like they could not get it together. There was a lot of turnover at the leadership level, and a lot of turnover, administrator, DON, social services director, maintenance director. Everybody's being turned over in this building. And I went over, oh my God, that's too bad. I went over to the nursing home, and when you walk in, the nursing home is shaped like an upside down, like a U, like you go in the bottom of the U, and it's 3 stories. And every time I show this picture, I want to tell people that the good news about this is that this room is actually on the 3rd floor. So you walk in, you have to take, the elevator up to the 3rd floor, and then you go all the way down on the left, and it's the last room on the left. And the door is always closed. That would be like the only kind of acceptable, out of sight, out of mind kind of situation you'd be seeing here. But the truth is, this is the first room you see on the 1st floor, and the door is never closed. And in fact, not only is the door not closed, but I'm taking the picture with my phone, and I'm in the door. So I'm leaning against the door jamb taking this picture. Let's bring my microphone over to make sure you can hear me good. I'm in the door jamb taking a picture of this mess, and I'm leaning against the wall that shares the administrator's office with the same wall. So the administrator's, it goes, you walk in, it goes business office, administrator's office, this resident room. And right across from this resident room is the social services director's office. And everybody I talked to, I said, have you seen this room? Have you seen this room? Like, what's happened here? Everybody said first, everybody was like, they didn't see the room. They're like, oh, what room? Oh, that, oh yeah, no, so-and-so, such and such, Nobody took responsibility for it. Nobody took accountability for it. Nobody knew how long it had happened. Everybody was being turned over so often that this is room number one in a building that you may not be surprised just by looking at this, that 3 months later, the state came in and shut the building down. No, I'm not in the bathroom, but I do have toilet paper in my office. Thank you. That'd be awesome if I was actually. It's a prop. Look at this. It's a beautiful backdrop here. I work hard to make sure my backdrop is funny, engaging. I mean, and it's real toilet paper too, by the way. It's real toilet paper. It's my humor. It's funny. Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, clearly the person has a behavior issue. Clearly there's some hoarding issues here, which we deal with all the time in senior care. It's nothing new. What's new is that nobody took responsibility for it. Everybody claimed they didn't see it. Everybody claimed to have a blind eye towards it. And 3 months after I went there to do my first assessment, the state came in, shut the building down, and it is now condos. This nursing home is no longer a nursing home, and it is 100% because of the manager. It is the burden of leadership, even though managers are clearly the ones not making the mess. They're clearly the ones that are in charge that could make it happen. If you were to contrast everything I just showed you with this, now how do you feel about the management team? Now how do you feel about living there or having your loved one live here? It's the same staffing challenges. These buildings all have the same staffing challenges. This building here has staffing challenges. This building here is just as regulated as every other building. This building is under CMS. This building is under the DOH. This building gets Medicare and Medicaid and some private pay sometimes, if we're lucky. All these buildings are the same. It's always about the manager. Here's the proof, or here's the thing that's most disconcerting. Every year in the United States, 5 million people are promoted into a leadership position. 5 million people are promoted into leadership every single year. However, the problem with that is 2/3 of them, 3.3 million of them, fail in the first 90 days. And that failure comes in a few different, it looks different to some places, but they come in 3 different categories. Failure as in you get terminated, like failed, you get terminated, like you failed epically, you're going to get terminated. But then there are some who fail and they get demoted. We tried you in a leadership position and then we demote you. The third kind of failure is maybe the worst kind of failure. And that is after 90 days, they are really not doing a good job. However, the management team or the organization as a whole doesn't have any other option but to keep the manager in their position. So not only have they epically failed in 90 days, but they're still a manager. Guys ever see anybody like that? Anybody nods heads? Somebody who's in a leadership position and probably should not be in a leadership position? Those are people who have passed the 90 days. It's the Peter principle, exactly. They've passed the 90 days, but they are no longer effective. In fact, it takes them a long time to get out from underneath that whole thing. So I have 5 simple rules for managers. And I believe it's these 5 rules that will make it so that you go from a manager who is unable to manage, unable to get people to do what you need them to do, to getting people to do what you need them to do. The difference is going to be stark. And so these 5 rules for your notes, you're going to want to write these down. They're very simple, but they are anything but easy. I wish I could say they were simple and easy, but we'll see they're just simple. So if you're ready, rule number 1 for managers. Managers are not allowed to walk by trash. And in fact, I would say that everybody who's in a leadership position, especially those of you who are on this call, I guarantee one of the reasons why you are in a leadership position is because you are the type of person who doesn't walk by trash. I'm sure that's a pretty fair statement. You probably already don't walk by trash, but I will go one step further and say that if you were working for me, if you were one of my managers, just to let you know, if I saw one of my managers walk by trash, I would write them up. And if I wrote up a manager 3 times, I would let them go. Let them go, by the way, is probably one of the safest vernaculars to use when you're letting somebody go, or we're going to make today your last day, or we're going to let you go. I would invite you to consider not using the word fire unless you have a bag of marshmallows and intend to sit around one. Using the word fire, like you're fired, adds a whole degree of emotion behind it that can get quite challenging in heated situations. So we're going to make today your last day is a much better vernacular, much better turn of phrase. So rule number 1, managers are not allowed to walk by trash. Rule number 2, managers must be on time. Now, I know most managers get to choose when they start, when they end. I know a lot of administrators and DONs especially, they start with their end in mind. If you have a late resident family council meeting, you'll start a little later. If you have something that you're going to be having to leave a little early, you'll start a little early. And so you can have this ebb and flow at the leadership level where you're coming in a little bit later, leaving a little bit earlier, that kind of thing. And I would invite you to consider that being on time is essential for your employees. And it should be essential. It is a rule for managers. Managers must be on time. But here's the thing. You get to choose the time. So if 7 a.m. makes sense for you, great. If 8 a.m. makes sense for you, great. If 9 a.m., 10 a.m., whatever the time, you decide. But once you decide, what I would invite you to do is tell everybody, you can expect me at this time. Listen, I come in at 8 o'clock. Everybody can expect me at 8 o'clock. So all your staff knows that you're going to be in the building at 8 o'clock. And then it's your job to move heaven and earth to always be there at 8 o'clock. Never 8:01, not 8:05, not 8:20, 8 o'clock. Managers must always be on time. And if one of my managers is not on time, I will write them up. And if I write them up 3 times, I will let them go. Rule number 3. Managers must, I used to say managers must dress professionally, but I really don't mean, I brought a zebra with me. A zebra. Does anybody know why zebras are black and white striped? Anybody? For a long time, I mean, decades, research scientists have never understood why zebras are black and white striped, because they don't blend in with their environment. Their environment on the Sahara in Africa is brown, is blue, is green, even some reds. Nothing is black and white in the Sahara. So why are zebras all black and white? And forever, scientists didn't know until one day, these researchers came along and they were trying, it's not funny, I shouldn't be laughing. They came along and they were trying to find out the migration pattern of this pack of zebras. They wanted to know where they went and when they went there so they could track their migration pattern. They were doing some stuff with agriculture and with building, and they didn't want to get in the zebras' way. So they wanted to make sure they left a clear line of wherever the zebras were going, they wanted to be able to make sure they could continue to go there. So they shot one of the zebras and with a couple of the zebras with a dart to get them to sleep. And then they put these orange tags in their ear. And the tag had like a little computer chip so that they could track the movement of all the zebras. And it seems logical. It seems fine. But then every zebra that was tagged with an orange tag was eaten by a lion. Oopsie. Not funny, but the researchers were like, oh, wait a minute, what just happened? That's not supposed to happen. And that's when they started to pay attention to the zebras and their relation to hyenas and lions on the plains of the Serengeti. They were like, oh my God, now we see. Zebras are black and white striped because they're pack animals and they don't blend in with their environment. They blend in with each other. See, a lion or a hyena watching a big pack of zebras, they don't know where the individual zebra begins or ends. And in fact, when you see a big pack of zebras, what they've noticed is that all the baby zebras will be put in the middle of the pack so they don't get away from the pack. Because if they get away from the pack, they have no chance of surviving against a lion or an elderly or a zebra that gets injured. They will put them in the middle of the pack so that the lions and the hyenas can't see them, because of course they will not be able to get out of the grip of the lion. Now, I know in senior care, it is full of lions. I know that a lot of managers don't want to stand out. They would much rather dress like a CNA. They'd much rather dress like regular people, like just kind of blend in, because they see that family member coming in or the staff that's always complaining. You know, I get our desire to blend in, but we are not here, managers are not here to be zebras. We're here more to be lions and hyenas than zebras. So you must stand out. Dress so that your family members and your residents and people off the street, your employees, know who's in charge. They can just look at a group of people and easily pick out the unit manager, easily pick out the housekeeping manager from the housekeepers. We should easily be able to see who the dietary manager is from their dietary staff. You should be able to walk into the kitchen, be able to go, manager. That easy. You should just be able to pick it right up. And again, this is rule number 4 or rule number 3. So if one of my managers is working really hard to blend in and not hard enough to stand out, I will write them up. And if I write up a manager more than 3 times, I will let them go. Rule number 4, managers must get their work done on time. It's no secret that managers are promoted from being the best worker. That's how we do it. We look for the best worker and we try to get them to say yes to taking on more responsibility, to be promoted into a leadership role. And I know you've heard it a million times. I've heard it a million times myself. So many people say, just because they're a good worker doesn't mean they should be that they're going to be good at managing. And I'm like, yeah, well, no kidding. But that it's not like we have any choice. Could you imagine the next time you need a manager and you're like, it'd be really great to promote into a leadership role. She's not here right now because she called out again, but she would be an amazing. No, you would never say that. If somebody's got a call out issue, they're not getting promoted. We all know that. So we have no choice but to promote the best of us. So it's important that when you are promoted to a leadership role, that you continue to get your, oh, Mary, I feel your pain, my friend. I just saw what you wrote. It's the only thing that fits. Good Lord. Well, then, you know what? Have in construction, everybody dresses like construction workers. They all have flannel shirts or T-shirts and jeans and boots, but the hard hat is a different color. So all the hard hats, if you're a worker, is a white hard hat. If you're a manager or a foreman, they're blue hard hats. And then there's one red hard hat because it's the supervisor of the superintendent of the job site. So how do you suggest? Listen, I got to tell you this. I was just I don't have a picture. I should have taken their picture, but I was just at a Best Buy, and Best Buy all has the same uniform. They have khaki pants and they have a light blue pullover shirt. And I saw 3 Best Buy workers at a cash register, and they all were wearing the same thing. Khaki pants, blue pullover shirt, and you could easily pick out who was in charge, even though they were wearing the same thing. Because the person who was in charge had their shirt tucked in, their pants were pressed, they were neat and ordered. They looked much more presentable than the other 2. And even though you're wearing the same thing, you could still stand out. A badge, I know a lot of places have different color badges for managers because the uniform is the same color or the same kind, especially with doctors and hospitals. All the doctors and hospitals dress the same, right? Do you have a lead CNA? A lot of us have lead CNAs. Well, how do we know who the lead CNA is? And think about why it's important for us to be able to pick out who's in charge quite quickly. A resident or family member comes in and they need help. They're trying to find the person in charge. Right? Like you're on the street and you need a police officer. Are you looking for anybody in plain clothes or are you looking for somebody in a police officer's uniform, right? I mean, you want to just be able to quickly identify yourself as the person to go to in the case of a problem. That's what I mean by standing out. Getting your own work done. I want to say 2 quick things about this. The first is that most of us suffer from an open door policy. And I know that there are many of you who may be not understanding what I'm saying. So let me try to break it down. There's 2 different types of open door policies. There's an open door policy that says that you can come to me about anything. So if you have any problems with anybody, it doesn't matter what the issue is, how personal, private, or outrageous, you can always, please feel free. My door is always open for you. Please feel free to always come to me. You always have somebody to talk to. That is, I would say, the best kind of open door policy. However, there's another kind of open door policy. And in fact, what it is I see a lot of people literally just leaving their door open and inviting anybody who walks by to just stop in, just drop in, just come on in. If you ever need anything, just come on in. I would invite you to close the door and not to have an open door policy like that. And the reason is quite simple. It's because you getting interrupted constantly throughout the day causes you not to be able to get your work done, because you're constantly having to help somebody else with their work. And I also brought my friend a little giraffe here. This is a real fun one, because most of the time, the reason we're being interrupted, not most of the time, but a great deal of the time that we're being interrupted, is because somebody is having trouble figuring out how to do their job or handle an issue or overcome our challenge by themselves. And so we're constantly just going and doing it, and we can't get our own work done. So let me just ask you about a giraffe. What do you think a giraffe does? A mother giraffe. What is the first thing a mother giraffe does when they have a baby? So the baby comes out. What's the first thing that you can, it doesn't snuggle it. It doesn't kiss it. It doesn't welcome it to the world. It doesn't start cleaning it up. What does the mother giraffe do immediately after they have the baby? That's right, Paige. They kick it. They kick it, and they kick it hard, and they keep kicking it, because they know that if the baby is ever going to survive out in the wild, it has to be on its feet very quickly. Now, you may not think, as you think about going into your nursing home and walking down the hallways, that you have any lions and tigers and bears out there, but you do. I'm telling you what, if you have a brand new employee who is not able to get on their own 2 feet and do their job on their own quite quickly, there's a lot of staff in your home that are willing to pounce, and they're going to pounce at any moment. I'm going to tell you, there's this whole thing. I brought a little mouse here. Does anybody think, I'm going to be quick here, I'm running out of time. Does anybody think it's possible to affect the behavior of a mouse just by using your mind? Anybody? Do you think I can affect the behavior of a mouse just by using my mind? There's a researcher named Bob Rosenthal, and he's a behavioral researcher in California, University of California, and he wanted to determine whether or not you could indeed affect the behavior of a mouse just by using your mind. And so this is what he did. I'm going to be very fast here. At the University of California, they have a whole research laboratory, so there's tons of mice, like this whole wall full of research mice. So he took these index cards, and he just went up and he labeled every one of the cages with a number and a designation on how smart they were. And the designation is based off of how well they can manipulate a maze to get a piece of cheese. As you all know, that's kind of like one of the dexterity challenges that we do with mice to figure out how fast or how good they are to adapt it to change. And so each one of the mice's cage were labeled with a number, and then it said it was either a above average mouse, meaning it could go through a maze really fast, or it was below average, which means it took longer than most, or it was just average. And then he invited a bunch of college students to come in, and they randomly were assigned an index card. And the index card just simply had a number on it. And so the student was to go, Laura, I have number 8. So they go to the cage that's labeled number 8. And this young college student goes up, and she sees the number 8. And on the card, it says that this mouse is above average. And so she's like, oh my God, he's so cute. And so she reaches in with both hands and she cuddles. She's like, oh my God, he's so adorable. And she puts him down in the maze, and she lets it starts the timer, opens the door, and boop, he goes through, and then she puts him back in the cage. The next person comes up, and he gets number 84. And so he grabs card 84, and he goes and finds number 84. And on the cage, it says that this mouse is below average. And he's like, ew, it looks below average. He knocks on the cage. He's like, ew. And he reaches in, he grabs it by the tail. He's like, this is so gross. And he puts it down, and he starts the timer, and the mouse goes through the maze, and he records the time. And on and on and on. They do 100 mice this way. And then at the end, Bob Rosenthal, the researcher, he calculates everything and he's like, it's amazing. Every mouse that was labeled above average was above average. And every mouse that was labeled below average was below average. And every mouse that was labeled average, well, of course they fell. They were average. But here's the thing. Bob Rosenthal didn't measure any of them before he labeled them. He simply randomly labeled all the cages. He just randomly said, you're above average, you're below average, you're just average, you're above average, like just random. So how then was he able to predict? What did he have, a psychic? He was able to just look at the mice and go, oh, he looks fast, so he's going to be fast. No, it turns out that mice are super sensitive to sound, to pressure, and to temperature. And so if you reach up, because the mouse is labeled as above average, you're like, oh my God, he looks above average. I'm so happy you're with us. And they set him down. This mouse is much calmer and way faster to get its bearing and find its way through the maze than the mouse who's like, oh, it doesn't look like you're gonna last anyway. Have you ever seen a new employee and you just randomly, you don't have to say it out loud. We can just you and me. You ever seen an employee and you just think there's no chance, I don't know who hired that kid, like that, she's never going to make it or he's never going to make it. And then you're not surprised, like 2 days later, they don't make it. Like, oh, of course. Here's the thing with Bob Rosenthal proved. He proved that it's not, there used to be this turn of phrase by Henry Ford. Henry Ford, the guy who created cars back in the assembly line anyway, back in the early 1900s. That's right. He said that he's quoted or he's credited with coming up with this turn of phrase that says, whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. And that's fun because it's kind of like, you're your own self-motivator. But what Bob Rosenthal proved is that's not right. Whether I think you can or I think you can't, I'm right. Because if I don't think you're going to be good at your job, I'm going to treat you like you're not going to be good at your job. And me treating you like you're not going to be good at your job is me treating you not good, right? Like if I think, have you ever hired somebody and you're like, you tell your spouse about it, you tell everybody, like, oh my God, I hired this girl. She's coming in on Monday. I can't wait. She is amazing. She's going to be everything. And then it turns out she is. It's because you treated that person like they belonged, like they were going to do well. Your expectations were high for them. And so it is a self-fulfilling prophecy that you do get what you think. So if you think somebody is going to be good, they're going to be good. If you think somebody's going to be bad, they're going to be bad. You know what the worst part about this is? Bob Rosenthal and his team, they actually expanded this to parents. And if parents have 2 kids and they think, Sally's probably going to go to college, but John isn't because Sally's smarter than John, they are literally going to treat John that he's not as smart as Sally. And so when it comes time to attention and homework and expectation, they're going to have far more attention expectations on the Sally in this example than they are of John. So it's not that Sally is smarter, it's that Sally's getting more attention because the parents perceive her to be smarter. They've done it in parenting, they've done it in ice hockey, they've done it in running, they've done it in military. They have proven again and again and again, it's how we perceive our employees. It's how the results we're going to get from our employees. It's crazy. I didn't mean to digress about that. Managers must get all their work done. Close the door. That's what my advice. Close the door. Rule number 5. Oh my God, the time is getting me. Rule number 5. Bonus points if you know who this is. Rule number 5. Managers must be visible. No, that's not me. Donna, how dare you? That is, yes, Jenna, see, extra points. George from Seinfeld. Managers, super great. Managers must be visible. And in fact, is anybody here, you must all be at this point familiar with the app Waze. You all know about this app Waze. Waze, if you don't know, it's a GPS app that you can use when you're driving, and it'll help you get to your destination as fast as possible. It tells you if there's traffic, it tells you if there's construction, it tells you if there's an animal on the road, if there's a pothole, like all these things. My favorite, of course, is they tells you where the police are. Oh, that's my favorite part. Knowing where the police are is my favorite part. And in fact, when I went to speak in New Hampshire to the Bureau of Prisons, which was a little disconcerting because I was the only one in the room who didn't have a gun. I was like, okay. But I was going through this program and I was talking, I got to this part where I was talking about the Waze app. There was a young officer in the room in the back and he raised his hand and I was like, yeah. And he goes, I started to use Waze to check in. And I was like, what does that even mean? Like, I don't even know what you mean. He said, well, and they all explained to me that if you're a police officer and your shift is from 7 to 3, say, you're not allowed to go back to the station to do your paperwork. And they're not like CNAs who at 2 o'clock all run to do the paperwork. You can't do that when you're in a police cruiser. You have to do your paperwork every time you get it. So if you pull somebody over, not you, but I've been pulled over, so I've done the homework for you. When you get pulled over and they write you a ticket and then they're like, okay, you can go. When you go, they still sit on the side of the road and you take off. And you're like, what are they doing? They're finishing their paperwork because they don't have the ability to go back to the station at the end of the day, like, quit at 2 o'clock and just, get to do all their paperwork. They have to be out patrolling all day. So they don't have that luxury. So they always have to do their paperwork in their car. The second thing, I don't know if have you ever seen two cruisers in the same medium of the highway and they're facing each other and you're like, oh, it must be nice sitting there smoking and joking with your friend. What are they, on break? I always thought the same thing too, but it turns out every time, this is crazy, every time you see two cruisers in the middle of facing each other, like door to door, they're having an in-service. They have their laptops up there on a conference call. And because they're not allowed to have it go back to the station for in-services, they have to pull over on the side of the road and they do in-services in their car. I know, it's absolutely crazy. The other thing I learned about police officers is about them flying down the road. Have you ever been on the interstate and you're going at 65, 70, 75 miles an hour and a police cruiser just right by you and you're like, oh, well, if that was me, I mean, good Lord, it must be nice. It's not fair that they get the speed and and we're going to ticket if we tried to speed like that. Well, it turns out, because I thought that way, but it turns out there's a difference when you're a police officer. There's a difference between driving and patrolling. And it's the difference between being an employee and being a manager. See, the police officer's job on the interstate is not to travel in the slow lane. It is to patrol to make sure you that's in the slow lane can get home safely. That their whole job is to find accidents and issues and things going on in front of traffic. That's why they speed. And they're allowed to speed. They're allowed to go, I think, 10 miles over the speed limit. Maybe it's more than that. Maybe it's 20 miles. Either way, but that's what it's patrolling. It's not, so it's a different thing. And, in management, we find that all the time where somebody's like, no, why don't you do it? Saying that to the manager. Well, it's because the manager's job is to make sure you do it, not for me to do it. That's the whole difference. And there's the little dichotomy. But here's the thing about that officer. He said that every time he goes to have coffee break, he pulls off and he is always trying to hide so that cruisers today have these cameras on them all over the place. And when you're inside the cruiser and cars are going by, it's not uncommon for everything to just kind of beep. Like there's a sound for speeding. There's a sound for an expired plate. There's a sound for a wanted fugitive. And so you could be in a car with a busy interstate just going ding, 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 ding. And it could be quite annoying. So this young officer said that when he wants to have his coffee in the morning, he'll pull up on the interstate. He'll pull into a medium. He'll pull out his phone. He'll take out the Waze app and he'll say, I'm right here, identifying himself as the police officer right here. And what happens? Everybody on both sides of the interstate goes into the right lane, slows down, hands it 10 and 2, and nobody's breaking the law and he just enjoys his coffee. I just think that's absolutely brilliant. I was like, that is crazy. And so rule number 5 is to always be visible. I know for me, for years, I used to walk into my home and my office was right there, first door on the right. And I would just walk in, go into my office, pull up my computer and start looking at emails or listening to the phone messages. And some days I would never go out on the unit. I would never see anybody else. And if they didn't walk by my office, I would totally not see them. That makes me a super ineffective manager. So what I would invite you to consider is the idea of being, instead of an open door policy where you're letting people come seeing you, have what we call an empty chair policy. An empty chair policy is simply that. Every 30, 45 minutes, you decide how often, every hour, you're going to get out of your office and walk the unit. And when you're out walking the unit, what are you going to be doing? You're going to be trying to proactively find challenges. You're going to proactively meet with residents and staff members and just say, how are you? And by the way, you don't even have to. I remember this one time I was waiting outside of a building. I just got there and I was running a little bit late, and I see there was a car with the engine running, and it was 4 grown adults in this small car, which is just odd, right? Like, it's not too odd because people carpool, but this was just odd because it was after 7. It was like 8 o'clock in the morning, 7:30. And these were people that didn't look like they were workers. They looked like they were dressed nice. They had suits on. They're all 4 people in one car. And I was like, what? And then they got out of the car and they were standing around the trunk. And that's when it hit me. They're with the state. I was like, oh, they're with the state. And they had a roll of, I don't have it in front of me. They had a tape dispenser, like not like one that you get for Christmas, like this tiny little one, plastic one. I mean, a desk tape dispenser, like somebody took it from their office, like, we're going to need this. And they were in the back of their car, and they were pre-taping the sign, so that when they walked into the building, they literally just put the sign, the tape was already on the sign. They just placed it on the door that said, state survey in progress. They didn't take their coats off. They didn't put their bags down. They stuck their sign up, said good morning, and walked right into the kitchen. They're like, hello, kitchen. Where's the hairnets? Can I get a thermometer? Oh, look, this looks good. Can you temp this for me? Is this what's supposed to be the alternate? What's the main today? And for us who've worked in dietary, we're like, tag, because they literally catch us off guard, right? Because they just came in out of nowhere. That's what I'm talking about. Just being visible, walking in, put your bag down and just walk the unit. You don't even have to do much more than that. Just walk the unit and you will be able to affect an amazing amount of positive results. So I'm super behind here. These 5 rules for managers. Managers, don't walk by trash, be on time, dress professionally, or at least stand out, get all your work done, and be visible. Listen, you all know that these 5 rules are pretty basic. They're seemingly really simple, seemingly really easy to handle, right? And in fact, I would argue that these 5 rules are not just for staff, for managers. I would say that we should implement these 5 rules for everybody. Does that make sense? I mean, is there an employee you have that you don't think should not walk by trash, or think that they should be on time, or dress professionally, or get all their work done and not hide? I mean, what are we talking about here, right? I'm going to throw one quick little wrench in here, and I'm so sorry that we only have 6 minutes left. I'm going to throw a small wrench in here. And this is for those of you who are serious about being an effective manager. Rule number 1, managers are not allowed to walk by trash, and they're not allowed to pick it up. Managers are not allowed to walk by trash, and they are not allowed to pick it up. And in fact, if I see one of my managers picking up trash, I will write them up. And if I write them up 3 times, I will let them go. I know what you're all thinking. You're all like, oh my God, what are you talking about? Aren't you supposed to lead from the front? Sure. I mean, what are you supposed to do? What if we did make it the rule that you're not allowed to walk by trash and you're not allowed to pick it up? I'm going to give you, let me broaden it a little bit. Let me say this. There are a few times when I think that managers absolutely should pick up trash. Number 1, if you drop it. Number 2, if there's nobody around. And number 3, if you see a resident drop it. I think those 3 times you should pick up trash. But if you walk on the unit and there's CNAs around and nurses around and everybody's around and you see a glove on the floor, I'm going to invite you to consider you picking it up is not managing, not leading from the front. If you want to be an effective leader, you're going to ask someone else to pick up after themselves. You're going to get them to pick it up. And I know for most of us, that seems like a harsh reality. It's much easier. I'd rather just pick up the trash. I'd rather do it myself. I'd rather do everything myself, quite honestly. I mean, it's crazy to think that we should ask staff to pick up trash that they drop on the floor. I mean, especially if I don't even know who put it there. I mean, I don't know who dropped it. I mean, what am I supposed to do? Did I tell you the turnover rate at the management level is at the highest it's ever been? Did I tell you that more than 5 million people are promoted into a leadership role every year and 3.3 million of them fail in the first 90 days? I'm going to be very fast here. Let me see here. Let me just grab a blank piece of paper. I'm going to try my best to be very quick. I'm going to show you something. I want to try to draw leadership on paper. So this is called, I want to use a white pen. Okay. This is called a leadership system. I am a process expert. So as part of my what I do is I help rewrite job routines, put systems together, processes together, and I look at leadership the same way. Leadership is a system. So let me explain leadership. I'm going to try to give you a super easy way to not walk by trash and not pick it up. That's my intent. I'm going to show you how to not walk by trash and not pick it up. Record speed here. Here we go. Leadership system is broken up into 3 things. There's a decision. And for these purposes, let's say that the decision is we're going to do a room change. And the room change is going to be from room 109 to room 210. And we find out about the room change at 10, and we have a new resident coming in at 11. So we literally only have 1 hour to do it. And let's just say that this is our decision. Our decision is this room change. The first thing that we do when we make a new decision as a manager is we communicate it. We tell the person or the department, whoever is in charge of the room change, who's in charge of moving the stuff or cleaning the room, whatever it is, whoever we tell, we have to communicate that decision. And then from that communication, we have to follow up. FU equals follow up in these frames. There, we have to follow up. And when we follow up, we're going to find out it's either done or it's not done. Those are the only 2 things we're going to find out when we follow up. But whatever it is, it's done or it's not done, it's going to trigger another decision. Let's say, for instance, that it is done. We show up at 11 and it is done. What's our decision? Our decision is probably to tell the people who are doing that room change to go back to doing this other thing, or you have another project in mind for them or something, right? It's going to be another decision. So you come up with another decision and you communicate that decision. And then at some point, of course, you're going to have to follow up, which is going to trigger another decision, which then you're going to have to communicate, which then you're going to have to follow up, which then is going to trigger another decision. Does that make sense? This is leadership on paper. This leadership is a system, and this is what the system looks like. So now we're dealing with it being done. But what if it's not done? So first and foremost, anytime anything is not done, just for your notes, there's only 2 reasons why. It is either their fault or it's not their fault. And by them, I'm talking about staff. It's either your staff's fault that they didn't get it done, meaning they're moving in 2 speeds, slow and stop, or it is not their fault, meaning the equipment broke, there's no supplies, the resident won't get out of the room, the elevator's broken, the water's not working, right? Like, give me those. I love it when it's not my staff's fault. Give me every issue that's not their fault, because that's a management issue. I can just go, I'll get the elevator fixed. I'll order more supplies. You know what I mean? I'll go talk to the resident and get them out of the room. But boy, it's a lot harder. It's a lot harder when it is their fault, when it's because they're not working, they're too slow and stop, they're too busy smoking and joking rather than working, and that makes it really challenging. The other challenging piece about this is that if the decision is made at 10 a.m. and we follow up at 11 a.m. and it's not done, just think of the consequences of that. Again, burden of leadership. If it's not done, that means we have a brand new resident, sitting out in front of their room on a gurney with a family member. That family member probably has a garbage bag full of their belongings because they just came from the hospital. And by the way, they fell 2 days ago, broke their hip. They're just learning this morning or last night that they have to be put in a rehab center, and they don't want to be put in a rehab center. And everybody's disgruntled, everybody's nervous, everybody's new. And then they get there and the room's not ready. I mean, what kind of management team here? I mean, the manager, if they can't get a room ready, and they knew we were going to be here and their room isn't ready, I mean, this management team here must really, really be terrible. That's the burden of leadership. And so how do you overcome the burden of leadership here? And it is by following up with enough time to affect change. In other words, I need another piece of paper. Keep scrolling. All right, you gunky. Sorry, let me just do another piece of paper. No, here, thank you. I don't want that. All right, I know we're out of time. I'm sorry. It's worth it. It's worth it. Let me go to the black piece of paper, white pen. Okay, so let's do this again. If it's the decision, communication, and the follow-up, and the decision's at 10 a.m., and we follow up at 10:30, what are we going to find out if we follow up at 10:30? It has to be done by 11. But if we follow up at 10:30, we're going to find out, is it going to be done, or is it not going to be done? If it is going to be done, it looks like you go, hey, how is everything here? Are you guys going to be getting done in time? And they go, yeah, we're on schedule, no problem. Then your decision is to go do something else. Follow back up at 11. And if it's not going to be done, it looks like they're falling behind, then your decision is, as a manager, you can get other staff, you can pitch in yourself, you can get them more tools, you might be able to get them a different room, you might be able to buy them more time. Do you see what you can do? You can affect change if you follow up with enough time. So that follow-up piece is super simple. And by the way, when I talk about a leadership system, I'm just going to do this very fast, and it triggers another decision, which triggers more communication, which triggers more follow-up, which triggers more decisions. We have to do another webinar so I can keep going with this. When you follow up, I do this all day. I have those workshops that go 2 days. So I'm trying to rush around here. This leadership system, leadership system is actually a clock. 12, 3, 6, 9, 12, 3, 6, 9, 12, 3, 6, 9. And this clock starts at 7 a.m. if that's when you start, 7 a.m. And it is literally what we do as managers. Managers, our whole job is decision, communicate, follow up, decision, communicate, follow up, decision, communicate, follow up. And here's the thing. The number one challenge most managers have is we hate to follow up. Why do we hate to follow up? Because when it's not done, we have a problem. We have a problem because we relied on our staff to get it done and they didn't get it done. Now the family member's outside with the resident and everybody hates us. Everybody's mad, attitudes galore. My fault. I'm the one in charge. That's why I don't like following up. It's much better for me to just put my head in the sand and go, I'm just going to assume it's done. And when it isn't, I'm going to be so surprised. I'm like, what do you mean? Oh my gosh, they said it was going to be done. That, my friends, is a recipe for failing as a manager. The way you get around confrontation, because that's just it. Nobody wants to confront anybody. The way to get around confrontation is by following up with enough time to affect change. If you follow up on the unit, you walk up on the unit at 9 a.m. and there's no trash on the floor, and then you follow up, you go back up on the unit at 9:30 and there's a piece of trash on the floor and there's only 2 CNAs or 3 CNAs, we could probably guarantee who dropped it, one of the CNAs, right? A little clue here. Housekeepers don't drop trash on the floor normally, right? So they're out. Business office people aren't normally on the unit, so they're out. Activities maybe sometimes create a mess, but they're usually, in one place, like the dining room or the activities room. Like they do create messes for us sometimes, but that's singular, right? Like we're talking about a glove on the floor in a hallway. We can pretty much easily. And then, by the way, if you're not going up on the unit, you start at 7 and you don't go on that unit until 3, and you find there's 4 briefs, three gloves all over the place. There's paper on the floor. That's super hard to manage because you're so not in it. You've not been following the leadership system. And so then at that point, to follow up, to engage, to confront somebody, it does not feel good. I agree. Let me stop sharing my screen. I'm exhausted. Helpful? Y'all ever seen leadership like that before? On paper like that? It's pretty great, right? Once you start understanding, because a lot of people think that, and I do too, I did too for a long time. I thought that you had to be born with the skill to be a manager. I thought you had to be engaging and likable and be able to have difficult conversations with difficult people. Thought you had to have that kind of intestinal fortitude. The truth is, it's a system, and it's a system that anybody can learn. And that's the good news. That's fantastic news for all of us, because that means every one of us can become amazing at managing with very little confrontation. Forget confrontation. If you're in it with them, if you're seeing the problems and the challenges they're having getting something done before the end, you can help. And if you can help, your team will amazingly come out of the woodwork for you. They will want to work for you. I will want to work for you if you're that kind of a manager. That's all my time. I apologize for being a little